Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is TB Skyn, and we're going to be looking at some animation again today. Now, I was asked by someone random on the internet whether I would be doing one of my animation breakdowns on the new World of Warcraft cinematic intro trailer for Battle of Azeroth, the next expansion. And I was initially I was kind of reluctant because when it comes to animation, my primary expertise is in 2D. I'm substantially more well-versed, I'm substantially better at analyzing, at breaking down exactly how 2D animation works, and I'm not necessarily as well-versed when it comes to 3D animation. But I was asked to do it, and so I set about trying to see if I couldn't find something worthwhile or interesting to say. And I think I've gotten a couple of things down that might be worth taking a look at and might be worth pointing out as a point of interest. For example, notice how one of the things that this animation short is supposed to do is establish the conflict between the Horde and the Alliance once again, because that is what the expansion is returning to, is that central conflict in the narrative. So take a look at how the different troops move. As we come up here, we've got a bunch of archers out on the right side, all of them firing at the enemy. Now notice how they are not firing in sync. They are in fact firing at completely different timings, right? They all do it at their own pace, with their own sort of agenda for how they feel like it's supposed to happen. Now take a look at how the troops for the Alliance move. Let's see if I can find... Yeah. Take a look at how the troops for the Alliance move in the shots that they're in. Take a look at the order and the synchronicity of their movements, especially if we're looking at archers. Take a look at how the Night Elves fire their bows in almost perfect synchronization as a point of contrast with the way that these, I think it's undead archers, just kind of fire whenever they feel the timing is on. And this happens in multiple places. You can also see it with... Let's see if we can find the shot I'm thinking about here. You can see it here, for example, in the background. As even as these soldiers are just standing around idling, right? They're not necessarily attacking or moving or doing anything. Look at how in sync their motion tends to be. They're not really chaotic, they're not really bouncing around or jiggling, they're very stoically standing, and they sort of move on very similar beats. And you can see it again here in the background. Look at the spears as the soldiers are being told to march around on the scene. Synchronicity of motion, discipline, order, everything flows very smoothly with them, which is part of the visual story. Now, this is not exactly mind-blowing stuff, but it is something that is a testament to just how thoroughly the Blizzard animators consider how they want to show the difference between the Horde and the Alliance, that the Alliance is always moving in, you know, military precision, synchronization, whereas in the shots where it is the Horde doing stuff, we get much more of a sense of individualism and chaos and everybody moving kind of according to their own designs. A Tauren does not synchronize with an Orc, particularly. As you can see in this shot, right? As this Tauren is dragging away his fallen comrade, another Orc is doing his own thing, swinging an axe at an attacker over here. We've got a Tauren in the background here doing his own thing. And other Orc and Horde warriors, all of them moving out of sync with each other, all of them engaged in their own battles. Whereas every time we see the Alliance, they're all doing their thing at once. It's all stand together, move as one, as I think Varian shouts out at some point during this particular animation. Ooh, and here comes another little interesting bit. As we see Sylvanas gearing up to, and I love the detail on this tower. Let's just take a look at the detail on this tower. Take a look at the little guys just in there manning it. Let's see. Yeah, it's kind of hard to frame by frame at 1080p. I should probably set that to 720 so we can do frame by frame, because my computer is old and slow. But that's just another wonderful little bit of attention to detail. Like, how does this trebuchet tower work, right? How does this thing function? Why is it possible to have a giant tower with a trebuchet on it? Well, a couple of dwarves inside, manning some wheels. And this is actually going to be important later on, because Sylvanas destroys this tower specifically by jumping up and firing, I think, an explosive arrow down into the compartment with the two dwarves or two people manning all the gears and wheels and the machinery. So this is also a bit of just of just good cinematography, good storytelling. The short is showing us that these guys are here. They're planting the fact that the towers are operated by people who can be taken out by an arrow before they have Sylvanas do a super cool action move where she jumps up, kills the people manning the tower, and jumps down, as we shall see in just a moment. And I also love, I mean, Blizzard have always been spectacularly good at their smoke effect. Smoke effect is something they've really pioneered in terms of how to make something look nice and realistic in a 3D animated features, and they're happy to use it all the time. And again, by the way, in this shot of the troll lying down the battlefield, notice how the Alliance are all moving very much in sync with each other. It's always there present, this notion of how you show that, okay, the Alliance are all about regimentation, they're all about soldiers marching together, standing as one, discipline, order, as compared to the chaos of the Horde. But now look at the way that this is the moment when Sylvanas decides to be a stone cold badass, right? Now look at what happens with her hair and with her face. Right? You noticed that, I hope. As she decides to start channeling extra power, her hair starts flying up and billowing in the wind. And as an interesting little side note, this is something you'll often see in movies by Studio Ghibli, where when a character is angry, when a character has rising emotion inside of them, one of the ways that Studio Ghibli will show that in their 2D features is to have their hair start to wiggle, or to rise a little bit as though it's being lifted by wind or something like that, which I think is just it's a very clever little thing to adopt for her, because it also is a visual reference to the fact that she can turn into a banshee with all those tendrils and everything flowing out, as we'll again see later in the short. But also notice her face. It's gonna get darker. Right there, right? It's not because the light in the scene changes. Not particularly. But there's this change of mood, and the darkness accentuates the red glowing eyes and make them look more menacing, make them look more dangerous. So there's a lot of visual signifiers telling us, oh, okay, she's about to do a thing. Let's see, Sylvanas being a stone cold badass. Is there anything I can look at in the motion here? Because I don't really think there is. Blizzard have been extremely good at finding ways to create realistic motion, and there we see the two guys that were set up earlier in the tower, and how the short capitalizes on that setup. But something Blizzard has been extremely good at, and their animators have been extremely good at, is finding ways to make the movements of these characters believable. And that's really difficult, but because what you're dealing with is something as weird as like this half-naked elf lady who has to move in a way that has weight, that has mass, that feels like, okay, when she lands on something, there's a real impact. And it's the same thing for orcs, these huge hulking brutes just implausibly put together, really shouldn't function. You have to give them motion that is realistic to, or I say realistic, in real life you couldn't have something like that, and you couldn't have someone wearing armor like that. Everything about the universe of visuals that World of Warcraft is designed around is deeply unrealistic. It doesn't work. You can't, it's not that most of what they have on doesn't work as armor in real life. So you have to find a way where the characters can move in a way that makes their armor look weighty and interesting, but also allows them to actually, move and have motion. And here again, there was a lot of shots in the opening scenes when the Alliance is dominant, as they are in the opening of this short. Then we get a lot of shots focusing on the regimentation of their soldiers, the coordination, and their ability to act in lockstep and unity with each other. But now that the Horde is getting a resurgence inspired by Sylvanas' example, watch the chaos start to sweep in, right? Because we have this guy charging forward all on his own, grabbing the flag, and that motion transitions us into looking at this troll. Okay, while he's charging, I'm going to do a different thing. I'm going to do lightning magic and throw it at the ground, and then boom, things happen. And then we get a Tauren bursting through some barricades, and You know, then we get this shot of just absolute pandemonium erupting as the regimented lines of the Alliance are juxtaposed with the swirling chaos of the Horde. And again, it's not advanced stuff, it's simple, it's just simple filmmaking, but it's simple filmmaking that I don't think is often appreciated enough when it comes to the Blizzard shorts, is that their filmmaking, just on a purely technical level, their filmmaking skills are fantastic. And interestingly, you see how now that the Horde has brought the chaos in, all of a sudden the Alliance is acting a little bit more unsteadily. They're acting a little bit more out of sync with each other. As Varian calls the charge there, you can see the soldiers, once again, not moving quite as in sync with each other. So you can see the energy of the Horde, the chaos of the way that the Horde moves, has taken over the scene, which again marks their dominance in the narrative of things as they're going on. So long as there is chaos, the Horde can beat the Alliance. So long as there is order and stability and regimentation, the Alliance can beat the Horde. That is sort of the underlying storytelling that the short is putting on. And again, this is just... it's all meant to help sell the central narrative of the short, which is that the Horde and the Alliance are very different and they're fighting over their differences. And it's very simple, but it's very effective. And it's part of why these shorts are so good. And it's part of why we have such a reaction to them, why they seem so intense and emotional. It's because the filmmaking principles that underlie the thing are just rock solid. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Varian for a second, because there's something interesting going on with the way that the World of Warcraft cinematic universe presents humans next to the more monstrous inhabitants of the Warcraft universe. But first, I'm interested in the animation that they use on Varian's face here, because it is very exaggerated. And that's a difficult thing. There is a thing... in Disney animation, for a long time, the job that the animators did not want to have, the job they did not want to do, was to animate the prince and the princess of the story. The romantic leads. They didn't want to animate them because they were incredibly boring to do. Because the prince and the princess had to be the centerpieces. They had to look very nice and look very pretty and look very handsome and look very good, which meant you couldn't really mess with them. You couldn't really drag their proportions around, you couldn't deform them, you couldn't squish them, you couldn't really play with their features to make them, you know, give them animation smears and stuff like that. A lot of it was rotoscoping, which is a practice where you trace animation over frames of video footage so that you very precisely copy the way that a real person would behave. And animators hated the job because, first of all, it was really difficult. It was really difficult to keep that, to always hold very strongly on to that idea of they have to be on model, they have to look pretty, you can't mess around with the proportions too much. And then on the other hand, it was also just boring because you didn't get to be really creative. You had to stick to the Disney formula. And everybody wanted to animate the villains and the side characters because that was where all the fun, all the expression was. And I bring that up with Win because once again, we have here, he's very much a pretty boy. Someone on Twitter called him a twink, which I believe is fairly accurate. But nonetheless, in this weird cartoony universe where just, you know, a photo shoot model for some men's warehouse is standing side by side with Captain Forehead over there, the animation style that he has in his facial animation kind of has to match the exaggerated cartoonishness of the universe that he's in. And you can see it in as he does his initial shout here. Take a look at the way his mouth moves. Right? It's almost like he drops his jaw when he goes from this open to close and then this little shift downwards. Look how his jaw drops. Like it's like thunk. And this emphasizes the emotion that he's speaking with, like he's pushing the words out, he's punching the words out of his mouth. But it's also exaggerated. This is not really how real people move, but it's how he has to move in order to make sense in a universe as exaggerated and cartoonish as the World of Warcraft universe. Notice also the way his armor moves, right? because as he's moving right now, he's got like a good inch of steel just sitting on his shoulder there. Like, those are some thick-ass shoulder pauldrons. They're huge. They're enormous. They should weigh a substantial amount of kilograms. But look at the way he moves with them, right? He moves as though they're no big deal, because he has to. But on the other hand, you also have to be very careful that they don't look like they're just attached to him with steel rods that they can't move independently. So there are little shifts of motion where you can see here, for instance, as he thrusts his arm forward, the armor follows, and then it just kind of settles into place a little bit. And again, that's a thing of, you need to find a way where the characters can move in a natural way, despite wearing, 100 million tons of armor. That would not make any kind of sense in a real world, but you also have to find a way to ensure that that armor doesn't look like it's made of plastic or fairy wings. And again, as we talk about, he has to look realistic and human and pretty, but look at his mouth, right? Look at the shout, look at the scream, look at all that motion going on in his jaw. And the exaggerated motions of the tongue. And again, that's not really how a real human face would move, but it's how it has to move, because again, look at the way the orc's face moves over here. And I love the way they animate orc faces in this thing, because when orcs shout and move their faces, their jaws are kind of like a sack of flour attached to the lower part of their head. You can see how it kind of gets swung around and dragged around, because they're swinging their lower jaws around, which makes them look kind of bulldogish, kind of animal-like, but also kind of sells just how big they are. I also love the subtlety of the facial animation that goes on, because again, like I talked about, they have to do a lot of exaggeration to match the tone and the feel of this ridiculously fantastical fantasy universe, but also just... oh, that's captions, that's not what I want. But also look at that little smirk that comes up on his face as he finishes his war shout. And he's like, yay, the corners of his mouth just move just a little bit up as he smiles. And you can see Sylvanas echoes that. She too gets just that little bit of mouth movement, that little bit of smile, a little bit of a grin going on there, as they both realize that they're facing a worthy opponent. And again, from a filmmaking perspective, you are mirroring the two characters, because one does one thing and then the other character follows that motion, which builds a connection between them, which tells us that they are similar somehow, that there's some point of comparison between them, some sort of connection, is what the visuals are telling us. And that is just, it's just very good filmmaking. It's really what's going on with these shorts. There are people in here working on this stuff who just know their SHIT, who know how to construct a scene, who know how to construct a narrative. Because again, this is the short that's supposed to set the tone for the entire expansion. This is the first look that a general audience is gonna get on this thing. This is the thing that says, this is what the expansion is about. This is what you're supposed to get excited for. This is all the cool stuff that's happening. And so the Blizzard animators have just gone 100% all out on thinking about, okay, how does the Alliance move? How does the Alliance present itself? How does the Alliance behave? So that it's not just two armies of people in stupid, oversized metal armor running at each other and you can't tell the difference because they all move in the same way. So the Alliance, stiff, regimented, regular, controlled motion. Very much in sync with each other. The Horde, everybody does their own thing, but they do their own thing together, right? Chaos versus order. Control versus loss of control versus wildness. And it's just good filmmaking. It's just good filmmaking, and it's the kind of subtlety that, for a lot of animation shorts that are connected to video games, are more focused on shit just has to look cool. It just has to look cool. Just big explosions and things being torn apart and heads flying and flash and action. But the beautiful thing about the Blizzard animated shorts is that, yes, we get all this cool stuff, cool explosions, jumping off of falling towers, all of that, but it's also just damn good filmmaking. It's also just damn well put together. For example, this little shot here. Sylvanas, look at the way the camera moves. Sylvanas lands, takes out the 2 guards on the top, and when she lands, the camera follows her as she jumps. Oh, this is just very clever. This is stuff that applies in 2D animation as well. When you want to lead the eye, when you want the audience to know what's going on, Sylvanas moves from the middle of the frame to the right of the frame and gets all motion blurry. And the next shot, when she's flying over, she's moving from left to right here. She's also moving from left to right here. And as she enters, look at the coherence between the 2 shots. We cut while she's still flying through the air. And in order for us not to get confused as the shot cuts to the next thing, she is in more or less the same position in the frame when we cut to the next shot, so that our eyes, which were already focused here following her, will have no problem finding her in the new frame. Imagine when we cut from here to the next shot that she was down here in the frame, or over here, or up there. That would be, wait, hang on, where did she go? What did she do? Where did she move? And she lands, which gives the camera a downward motion following her, and then we get another downward motion as we look at her looking down on the 2. I think they are dwarves, or a dwarf and a human inside the tower, right? The camera moves down, boom. And then, again, notice here, when they realize she's there, they look up. And as they look up, we cut to Sylvanas, and as we cut to Sylvanas, she blows it up. And as the thing blows up, we cut to the outside with the explosion. So there's this constant transferal of focus, right? Where first we follow Sylvanas, then we follow her look down to the people down below. Then we follow their look up to Sylvanas up above. Then Sylvanas fires an arrow down that causes an explosion. Then we follow the explosion to a shot from the outside of the tower. And then we see things falling down. And as we see things falling down, we see people looking up at the things falling down, which leads us into the next shot where we're looking from the perspective of the soldiers on the ground, right? The camera has taken us all the way from the ramparts to the top of the tower to the ground, and from the ground we look up, and then we get this fantastic shot of Sylvanas descending from the ramparts, descending from the walls into the middle of the battlefield. So we've had this whole sequence that takes us from Sylvanas being above the battlefield, surveying the situation, trying to figure out what's going on, to Sylvanas jumping into the action and joining the soldiers on the ground. And as she joins the soldiers on the ground, they are emboldened and they take the initiative, right? So there's this wonderful coherence of storytelling, which it is just very good filmmaking, to be honest. And it's very good filmmaking done in a very short amount of time. This thing is only, what, 4 minutes long or so? And I think, yeah, that's pretty much the only other thing I have to say about it is notice how Wynn doesn't really become a character until his helmet falls off. Because up until now, he's been this enigmatic thing in a lion helmet that we don't really know who he is, but we know he has a super cool magic sword, but he doesn't have any personality so long as he's wearing this helmet thing. But then, as soon as he gets knocked over and the helmet comes off, boom, he also becomes a character, right? And part of that is when we open this short, we're supposed to sympathize with the Horde. The Horde is under attack. The Horde are being assaulted. They're being assailed. Their city is being destroyed. And who's doing the destroying? Well, some dude with a magic sword, but he doesn't have a face. He's faceless. He's essentially a Sauron character, right? He's just this emotionless helmet, expressionless helmet. Not a character, not a person, but a symbol of the Alliance as a whole. Not a human, not a person, but a symbol of the Alliance, which is attacking the poor, embattled Horde. So our sympathies in the opening moments of the short lie very much with the Horde, because they're the ones being wounded. They're the ones dragging their comrades to safety. They're the ones desperately trying to stave off the attack on their fortress here, and they're the ones standing bravely against overwhelming odds. But notice how it shifts. Because the moment the helmet comes off, which happens... When the hell does it happen? Here. The moment the helmet comes off, the perspective shifts. Now it's no longer about the Horde being under attack from the cruel Alliance. Now it is the Alliance and their soldiers struggling to deal with the emboldened Horde, and the leader of the group just desperately struggling to even beat this one troll, and everything's looking so hopeless, and all his soldiers are dead around him when we get this PTSD shot, basically, of him looking around and seeing all his friends and his allies dead on the battlefield. Everything is horrible. Now we're sympathizing 100% with him because he's a character. He's a person now. He has a face. He has emotions. He's sad. He's distraught. He's desperate to save his friends, which is why he's almost crying as he calls out for the healing light from up above. And again, it's just really good filmmaking, and I think I've said that about 150 times now. So this, that's what look at Bryn's crying little face, little baby face. I think she'll have to be that. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, if you have anything you liked about the video, you should feel free to leave it down below. I try to read my comments. I try to respond to as many of them as possible. And if you would like to subscribe, I would very much appreciate that. Or if not, you know, that's cool too. My name has been TBSkyne, and I will see you in the next video.